Hi everyone, I wanted to make a video where I talk about, in an unprepared manner, some of the good aspects about the internet. It's very easy to criticize the effect that the internet has had on society. I've indulged in that. And just because it's easy, by the way, doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. We should do it. But it's worthwhile reflecting on the good that the internet can be used for. At least at the personal level. I can't control how society generally tends to use the internet, but I can speak about what it's done for me that I'm especially appreciative of. I think this might be too reductive, but I think it's fair to say that the internet, and maybe I've spoken about this before in a different video, but there's like a cultural bifurcation happening where you could use the internet to access a really fantastic wealth of knowledge. Um, and you can also use the internet to destroy your brain and learn things that are not of much value to you and keep your psychology in a cage. And that's extremely dangerous. And I mean, in many ways, the overwhelming effect of the internet. But like I said, we're trying to keep this focused on the positives. Anyhow, I wanted to say I think the best way to use the internet is basically to turn it into like a personal library of Alexandria. There are so many things I've learned, things I've been able to find out instantaneously that I could not have figured out before the internet, or if I didn't have a cell phone in my pocket where I can easily just um, look up an important person or find out something about a scientific matter. If if I read something that directs me towards an esoteric book, and I want to get to the bottom of like a footnote in a book that I'm reading, I can very easily do that through the internet. In fact, I can almost instantaneously get to the exact page that I'm interested in and read it in a matter of seconds, if not or minutes, if not seconds. Um, like an example of this, so I like, okay, well, I won't explain how I stumbled upon this book, but this is a book by Henry Thomas Buckle called The History of Civilization in England. My edition comes in four books, technically two volumes, but each volume is divided into two parts. This book, when it came out, one day maybe I'll speak of this book at length. Um, when this book came out, it was kind of notorious for um, the, the amount of footnotes present in this book. I mean, Henry Thomas Buckle um, wrote this. He was an autodidact almost, and he wanted to create. Now I'm explaining the book, but he wanted to create like a scientific history for humankind, where he wanted to identify the general scientific laws that dictate the course of nations. And he picked England as an especially isolated case study for the trajectory of nations because it was, it's located on an island and it was free from, we'll say, the sort of confusing interference of like adjacent cultures that kind of bleed into other nations and yada yada. Okay, that was too much information. But anyways, that's a pretty ambitious project. This guy had a huge library. I'm talking like tens of thousands of books that he personally owned, and he focused relentlessly on writing this book. And it was even considered that he had worked himself to death. I think he died in his 40s. Um, I think that's right. And he didn't even finish. So the four volumes that we have, which total, I don't know, probably like 1,300 pages, um, that only composed the introduction to the work that he actually wanted to write, which is absurd. That really shows, yeah, just what a crazy endeavor that was. But here's an idea of like what the footnotes look like on this freaking thing. Um, okay, you can't look at that. Over half the page. I know it's blurry, but you can see the smaller font and the larger font. Over half the page is footnotes. Um, let's turn to another page. So here's another example. Start of a chapter. Okay, it's about a third of the page. Um, okay, both of these pages are. It's like half the page is footnotes. That's. I mean, you're going to get a crap ton of footnotes on every page. Well, the books that he cites are interesting because they're not books that you're going to run into at your like if you walked into a library today. These are books that would have been accessible to a guy writing in the Victorian era. So he's citing books that were written like early 19th century, but also a few books in the 18th century, quite a few, and even some of the 17th century. And I can like there, I can find copies of these books if I have questions regarding the footnote pretty easily. There's for example, I think I don't want to say Macaulay was the name because I there's a different Macaulay who wrote um, his own history of England that was known for like Whig history. Somebody wrote I have it bookmarked somewhere, so I'm not worried about me personally being able to find this out. But like, there's a guy who wrote a book called the Lives of the Stuarts, um, and that was like the shortened title of a larger title that was just about the history of like I don't know perhaps King James or King Charles all the way to Cromwell. Sorry for like if it seems like it's very clearly one or the other and I screwed it up. But anyways, these were 18th century real time or not real time, but accounts of people who would have more access to the lives of those who lived through a certain reign by a certain monarch, and so they could collect firsthand um, anecdotes, and even they could share. I mean, some of it would have to be, I would imagine, at the time, like as cultures typically assess their own history. Maybe some of it is apocryphal or something like that. But the result is you would get a pretty intimate account of the lives of these different kings and whatnot. And we typically these kinds of primary sources. The way they exist in society today is like we expect scholars to kind of read this stuff, and you might pick up a book that was written in the last 30 years or so, um, about an important figure from history, but we've lost our ability, or yeah, kind of. We've lost the. If you go back far enough, back when the United States was reading old books, but we kind of lost the ability to read primary sources if they, regard historical accounts of something. Not a lot of people are reading books from the 18th century. Um, there's just, aside from like very famous pieces of fictional literature that have been, kind of become household or something, there was a shit ton of books written throughout history that we're ignoring, that we kind of expect other people to read and then sort of mediate for us as a go-between. A go-between the present and the past. We don't like to directly just stick our fingers in the past and get to know it ourselves. So I can look up this stuff and find things pretty easily on the Internet Archive, on Google Books. A lot of this stuff, if it's old literature, old writing, it's pretty easily found online. It's like stuff in the public domain, so you can get copies of the stuff. If I want a physical copy, even I can hop on eBay and look for an edition or something, or if there is a modern annotated edition of a book, and it's worth the money. I can go on a more a a bookseller that isn't selling just secondhand stuff. Um, anyways, that's another thing. The fact that you can order stuff online so quickly and receive it very quickly, again, is another. Um, it's a sort of fortune that we experience, where dense information, can be transmitted to a person very quickly. In the old days, your information would be limited to a kind of cumbersome library that you couldn't carry in your pocket, um, and books could get destroyed. There wasn't much mobility with this information. If you traveled or had to leave wherever your study was or something like that, there was a risk of the books being destroyed. I have a friend who I went to college with who went to grad school in New Haven, Connecticut, and He had an enormous library, um, like just a shit ton of books, and he put them in a U-Haul or so, not a U-Haul. He had actually a professional moving service move these books for him from the southwest of America all the way to the northeast, and there was like some accident happened where the cardboard boxes broke and shit like fell out of the vehicle or something. I mean, it was horrible. And he had some rare books in that collection. Anyways, that stuff would probably be far more common in an era where that was how information moved around. This individual, unfortunately, was not in a position to experience the joys of modern society. He instead found himself experiencing a rather old predicament, unfortunately. But if those books, if it's probably if you're like need to move your study, you're always going to need to move your study. But it would be certainly easier if the books were stored on a small device, which isn't always appropriate in every situation. But you don't have to worry about that stuff, and maybe that sort of event would have happened more commonly in other times that he had to move around. If he didn't feel like he could access sufficient information just on his own. That was so long-winded, but this is why I make this stuff. I get to talk. All right. I'm a common man. You understand? I'm a common man, and I get to speak in this society. You understand? Like the fucking meme of the dude standing. Okay, I get to speak. I believe this. Whatever. All right. So that's one example. I brought some other stuff. Like, this is a. Oh geez, this is a. Okay, this is an edition of This is an edition of Nietzsche's complete works that are based off of the scholarship of two Italian academics, Giorgio Colli, Mazzino Montanari, and they did some good work pinpointing. We'll say like where Nietzsche was drawing a certain argument from, what kind of books he was reading at the time that he was writing. They include his fragments, which are very intimate. This is not; these are not published works by him. This is stuff he was scribbling down in a journal. The notes here are pretty sufficient for. They're quite thorough insofar as citing and pinpointing what Nietzsche is reacting to, what he was reading at the time. Now, this would be This is a paperback. Paperbacks are great. But this is translated by Stanford University Press. Okay, and there was like a sale when I got this, so I got this pretty cheap, by the way. But like typically an academic edition of a book, I mean, paperbacks are great, but receiving it or even hearing about it or whatnot would be far less common if it weren't for the internet. If I just went to a store, I'd be getting, I wouldn't get Nietzsche's fragments. That would be probably too niche for an everyday person. But I would read like the Walter Kaufmann paperbacks. Again, paperbacks are good, but this is a specific kind of a version of Nietzsche's work. The Kaufmann versions of Nietzsche's works, which are typically the ones you'll find in a mainstream bookstore. Kaufmann is fine. His translations tend to be fine. It's just some of his notes there's some controversy surrounding the extent to which Kaufmann tried to appropriate Nietzsche into latter 20th century liberalism or something. And these translations are especially good because they don't have, they don't run the risk of being characterized as such. And then additionally, I can get books that nobody, I just found this on eBay one time. This is just I had read Portrait of, what is it now? Picture of Dorian Gray, getting it confused with the Joyce book, Portrait of the Artist of a Young Man. But Picture of Dorian Gray. And I liked it a lot. I wanted to read, something further about Oscar Wilde. And this was a book that came out in 1930 that's meant to be a sort of, it's supposed to clue you into some intimate details about the man. And there's even included a memoir by George Bernard Shaw, who is a playwright and a man who I adore. I think he's fantastic. I have all of his plays. Again, something I I found a bargain deal on Etsy. Anyways, I think he's a great mind, and I was curious, what did George Bernard Shaw make of Oscar Wilde? I haven't read this book yet, but I get to I get to find out. And that's not something that you would just find on the street. I mean, I guess you can show, like, I've been to a number of good used bookstores and stuff like that where you do find good stuff. And maybe they that was, the bookstore. I'm young, okay. I don't know the way in which um, like internet culture has or internet business models have like destroyed the local bookstore and what the quality was of local bookstores. I lived long enough to see Amazon wipe out like places like Borders. I know Barnes and Noble is surviving because they have come under new ownership and whatnot. But that was still a chain store, and my suspicion would be from the used bookstores that I have been to in my life. Sometimes what goes through a used bookstore, it's not always good stuff. It's like stuff that's just drawn from the community. And if the community doesn't have very good books, then you never would have run into great stuff. So it would depend on the city you're at that you would even find an especially interesting novel or something that's really rare. Or like rare, like, not necessarily monetarily the most valuable thing ever, but fairly niche, something that would be quite uncommon for a person, and especially up one's alley. With the internet, the market is enormous, and you can find anything you want, and you can. I even found there's been French philosophers who I've been interested in. I found record of their libraries online, like their actual library catalogs, and I could look at the individual books. And if they're in French, like I can typically hunt down some sort of bibliography index of the title, so I have it. I know what the book is. And if I can't find an English copy, which is typically the case for a lot of stuff, you can even translate passages if you need to. Um, we that's not always perfect, but typically if there's an imperfection, you can figure it out. And in this day and age, translation services are actually pretty good. They weren't always. I remember the early days of Google Translate, trying to do French homework. I shouldn't mention that, but yeah, but in it you couldn't always trust what Google Translate did, which encouraged me to study more. But I digress. And then another final thing, I just wanted to bring this up. I'm probably going to make a video talking about it because it's so good. But like even I don't know. It's not every day in a bookstore you'd even get access to something like an Oxford paperback or something, unless you were going to a university library and like a good university library or something like that, where like the famous stuff will come. But who's selling? Maybe your Barnes and Noble has it, but it's not like the unabridged version of James Boswell's Life of Johnson. This book is freaking awesome. This book rocks. It's such a wonderful account of 18th century England and the intelligentsia at the time. There were so many titans around. Boswell got to meet a whole bunch of different people. I will save this conversation for later or something like that. But yeah, I can get this super quickly, and I can read through it. And all the stuff I said about footnotes still applies. One thing I didn't mention that I wanted to in Buckle's book, I'm interested in early anthropology, and like the accounts of people who were encountering non-Western cultures and kind of what it meant to them, what sort of questions it opened up to them, and how they addressed these concerns. Like, what is the correct way to live? What is morality? What even is it? Why is it that the things that European society would believe in would be so ignored by another culture? How did people in Europe grapple with that? And I don't want the easy accounts of people being like, so they were just all Christians and they were like, this is evil, and it's like I want the nuanced firsthand accounts and the actual emotions of a person's intellect. I find that kind of information especially useful for making sense of our kind of our extremely interconnected late modern era, where tradition is kind of like all in disarray, and people are confused and they don't know what moral value systems to adopt. And there's all this influx of commentary from perspectives that trace their I don't know, either their being to non-Western cultures and things. It's like, oh my goodness, how do we make sense of this stuff? Well, the world is not a new thing. It's been around, and there were people who were observing many of the we'll say um, they got a preview into how the world was going to change from a vantage point of centuries ago, the early stages prior to modern globalization, and they could see. I mean, these were smart people, and they could see, um, what was suggested by the sheer variety of human behavior, so, anyways, Buckle cites a lot of anthropologists and explorers who were providing most of the accounts in the English world of foreign cultures had to just come from explorers at the time. These days, we can get you can find anybody to provide an account of their society just by virtue of the fact that they live there and can say anything. But this is an era where we're building the infrastructure of modern globalization, or that infrastructure didn't even exist; it's just being previewed or something. So he mentioned, as an example, he mentions a guy named James Pritchard, who wrote something called The Physical History of Mankind, and he was an early ethnologist. He studied the different the different races of mankind at the time. The categorizations are maybe not have perhaps been outmoded in say common parlance. But at the time it was like, oh, there must be these different kind of well, we have retained ethnicity, so it's not. I don't need to even apologize for this or make it seem like it's a difficult issue. It's not. As one can expect, it would be like, ah, these are the different races of mankind. What are their different traits and distinguishing features? What do they? How did they come to be? Pritchard becomes very close to suggesting like a Darwinian explanation for the variety of human races. He doesn't quite get there, but he gets so close. It's really fascinating. But I wouldn't have known about Pritchard if it weren't for Buckle, and I wouldn't have been able to read Pritchard's works if it weren't for the Internet Archive. And I can just pull that out and read it rather than doom scrolling, and I can read it for a long time. Anyways, all the stuff I've talked about, the reason why I wanted to sort of journey into all these different, works and writers and whatnot is to just remind people of what you could be using the internet to do and what you could be learning through the internet. Why is it that so much of the conversation surrounding the internet is like the same standardized memes and bullshit and just again, I've spoken about this stuff kind of in my previous video, but why is it that it's such a simple and standard affair? We could be using the internet to do a lot more. You should be using the internet to do a lot more, and yeah, and fill your mind with original ideas, pursue things that interest you, make use of this technology, and change your life and let it change your life, and in a good way, in a way that makes you more interesting, more mindful, that fills you in with dense information you got to grapple with, that really turns you into a useful person. So, anyways, all right, peace out. Goodbye, everyone.